Yes, good afternoon or good morning. I want to thank everybody for joining us on time today. We much appreciate that. My name is Kevin Miller with Astrix Technology Group. I'm going to be presenting a series of expert panelists with you today in our session. I briefly want to ask our panelists who are on right now to please mute your phones until it's time for us to come back on. We are picking up just a little bit of background noise. Thank you very much. Today's session is entitled Challenges Facing Startups and Academic Institutions when Implementing ELN, Electronic Lab Note Solutions. The session is sponsored by the Astrix Technology Group. Again, my name is Kevin Miller. I'm going to be hosting and directing the panel session today, and it's very much our pleasure to bring together a number of experts in their respective industries who are going to talk to you a little bit today about some of these topics. A little bit about Astrix Technology Group before we get into the material of the session. First and foremost, we want to obviously thank everybody who responded to our invitations to this session. We've got a lot of folks in our organization that pulled together some of their key contacts in the industry to spend some time with us today and offer this educational presentation to all of you. And again, we want to thank everybody for taking time out to join us today. In terms of who Astrix is and why we're sponsoring today's session, first and foremost, we're a company made up of informatics professionals who provide services and staffing dedicated to the scientific community. A couple of quick statistics on Astrix and some background information. The company itself was established in 1995 and it's privately held today. It originated actually as an IT division of a company called APBI, which at the time was a $300 million life sciences research organization. Today, we have over 500 employees with headquarters in Red Bank, New Jersey, offices all around the country and world. We have a staffing division which offers private and public staffing services, predominantly around scientific and IT resources. We also have a professional services division, which is very much focused on supporting science-based organizations, particularly around laboratory technology. The types of companies that we support and work with, Fortune 1000 life science enterprises, the government, and research institutions with large and fast-growing IT, staffing, and compliance needs. Our mission has always been to deliver scalable and sustainable solutions in IT and staffing for the scientific community. In terms of what we define as solutions for the scientific organizations that we support, it's broken down in science and business and technology, and ultimately we want to create value and trust in the business of science. We help our clients excel and solve very complex problems with both the right people and technology. One of the few organizations out there that have a combined scientific staffing and IT staffing group, along with a complete professional services organization built around technologies for laboratories. As far as staff goes, all of our staff come with deep scientific backgrounds with practical bench experience and broad subject matter experience. Laboratory management, laboratory operations, and managed services round out the professional services side. And then underneath technology, we are very specifically focused around laboratory applications, ELNs, LIMS, CDS, etc., with industry standard development and database tools to back us up. So some introductions. Who's going to be joining us today? And again, I want to remind everybody and encourage everybody to please ask questions throughout the entire session. What I do want to mention is if you ask questions throughout the session today, we won't answer them immediately, but we will answer them at the end, so we encourage lots of Q&A. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's content. First, Bruce Kazuma is Principal Systems Analyst at the Broad Institute. Bruce is going to be joining us today. Joined with him is Terry Haley, PhD, who's the Director of Research Information Technology at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And finally, Byron Dean, who's the Manager of Lab IT Solutions and Data Sciences and Technology Group at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. So we got some great minds here that are going to talk to us today, and I'd like to introduce each of them to come on and tell us a little bit about your background. Bruce? Bruce, are you with us? Bruce, you may have to unmute your phone. While Bruce is working that out, Terry, why don't we have you come on and do a quick intro?
Sure, sure. As Kevin mentioned, I'm the Director of Research Information Technology at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. I've been at Dana-Farber for 8 years in a number of roles, from next-gen sequencing informatics to a core facility director, and now as my role in research information technology. My background is a bit of a dual discipline. I have a computer science degree, and I have a PhD in molecular biology. Now, in my role as the Director of Research IT, I essentially translate the scientific and business needs with technology. As you can imagine, ELN sort of sits at the apex or the vertex of a lot of those functionalities. So this is a deeply interesting topic for me and for the folks at Dana-Farber.
Thank you, Terry, and we very much appreciate your participation today. Do we have Bruce back online?
Yes, sorry about that. I meant to hit the unmute button, and I did unmute myself by going off the call. My name is Bruce Kazuma. I am a Principal Systems Analyst at Broad Institute. I have a career in IT, both for commercial pharma and biotech companies, and in other associated IT industries. I got into supporting the lab as a result of me doing an SAP implementation, and I would get very interested in how the labs function. That led me into a role focusing entirely on supporting labs from an IT perspective. And so I've been observing this area now for 10 plus years.
Great, thank you very much. And Byron, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. I want to thank Astrix for inviting me, first of all. This is an exciting topic. My name is Byron Dean. I'm the manager of the Lab IT Solutions team, which is part of a group called Data Sciences and Technology here at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. It's an IT department, and I've been with the IT department for about 5 years now. My role is primarily as a technologist. I work directly with our research community, helping them solve complex solutions related to their research and IT. We did successfully implement an electronic lab notebook solution here at the medical school. We're about 1.5 years in now, and things are going very strong. Prior to my role here at the IT department for the medical school, I worked for an affiliate, mostly in healthcare IT-related areas, doing project management and client relations with the state of Massachusetts.
Great, and thank you again, Byron, and all of you for taking time out of what I'm sure a very busy day to lend some expertise on these topics. So with that, let's go ahead and advance and kind of run through the agenda here real quick, and basically kind of highlight some of the key topics that we're going to talk about, and maybe this will open this up and kick the discussion off from here. Typical organizational goals for academic research institutions, what are the challenges in the operating model, why solutions purpose-built for pharma biotech oftentimes aren't sufficient, what are the considerations for vendors, tips for academic institutions embarking on the journey, and then finally, what are some of the thoughts moving the industry forward. So with that, Bruce, if you want to go ahead and kick us off, if you'd like me to advance to that next slide, or if you want to kind of kick off on this slide, I'll take your direction.
Great, let's stay on this slide for a second. So again, I've had a career that has spanned academic institutions and pharma. And the differences between pharma and what is special about an academic research institution are very different, and they're very important for understanding how solutions need to be applied. And Byron has had extensive experience with this, and as I know has had Terry. And some of those challenges come in the very operating model. There are very different drivers in the academic institution market than there are in the pharma market. The regulatory scheme being one of them, a profit motive another, the need to publish, workforce, all kinds of things that come in. And that all leads to why solutions meant for pharma and biotech really need to be thought of a little differently for academic research institutions. And I'll sort of pause there and ask if Byron or Terry have anything to add to that commentary.
I don't think so. I think that you articulated it as an overview very well. The real big challenge is, as you mentioned, is trying to navigate the disparate interests and activities going on in academic institutions, and hopefully we'll be able to enlighten through some discussion today about how people might manage that challenge.
Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. So here are some of these real differences. In academia, there's a ethos of get the data out to the world when we're ready. It's a very important phrase. Nobody wants to put out data before they think it's publication ready. In other words, before it's ready to be talked about, reputations, careers on that data. But that does mean that there's a pressure to share data beyond organizational boundaries. Typically have a researcher who is at an academic institution, an affiliation with a medical school, who has other colleagues at other medical schools, other research institutions, and at commercial biotechs. And they immediately want to share that data with them because they need that expertise from other people to make further progress on scientific discoveries. And increasingly with MDs, they've got a patient in mind in a bed, not more than a quarter mile away that they're thinking about. So that really has implications on organizational boundaries. Also, there may be requirements from funders research to share that data. The NIH, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, for example, have very specific requirements on that. Dan Zuckerberg has other requirements on that. So that all has to be taken into account. Byron, do you want to add anything to that one?
Well, I'll just say here at the medical school, before we became involved, there was really no effort on the part of the research community or the Office of Research to really dive into digitization of lab notes or whatnot. And so when we embarked on looking into electronic lab notebooks for the medical school, the spectrum of responses was all over the map. You had various old school PIs that had no interest at all of moving to electronic lab notes, and then you had a gathering of the younger generation who sort of was looking for it, but didn't know where to look. So, and fill in the gap in between that. And so it was just an interesting dynamic that we really had to understand and overcome before we could really move forward.
Yeah, I certainly would agree with that, actually. And between Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and the Broad Institute, where we have a deep partnership, there were all sorts of challenges in that data sharing environment, especially with Dana-Farber being part of the Partners Network. And maybe, Terry, you can speak about that a little bit.
Right. So with Dana-Farber, we have a lot of relationships with hospitals in the area, research organizations in the area. We have these regional interactions and these partnerships, as I mentioned, with partners, with the Broad, with Children's, throughout the Longwood medical area. But then we also have them all around the country. So you can imagine if you're trying to do these collaborations, you're trying to protect the data, you're trying to, but make it accessible so that researchers can do their job. Part of the issue obviously comes into the legalities, right? You have two different legal organizations, so there has to be data use agreements. In some cases, working with vendors, you have to have BAA agreements if you're working with PHI. It's a complicated process and it's a complicated environment. The basal goals for the scientific organization, though, should definitely be represented through IP protection, data protection. As it mentions here, you've got grad students coming in and out. And then record retention and accessibilities. There's going to be regulations both from grant-giving agencies, or if you're doing clinical trials, there's going to be retention records as well that need to be met for compliance.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that at the Broad Institute, we have partnerships that literally span the globe. The Broad was heavily involved in the early research on which meant we immediately had international partnerships where the disease was really showing up. sets of graduate students who regularly take off to West Africa to conduct research, and setting up labs that want to communicate back to the U.S., labs that want to communicate in the EU, and so all of these transnational legal issues do come up, and it's IT's job in general to help scientists navigate through that while maintaining or helping them accelerate their pace of scientific discovery. I think the only things we haven't mentioned on this slide are things like out-licensing and other activities. Those are, the last ones in particular are very key because, as we know, the funding landscape in academia is changing and has been changing for quite some time, and is actually poised to probably take on additional change. No longer can we simply rely on a few philanthropists and governmental aid to provide the funding. So there's increasing turn towards consortiums of and trying to establish a much greater base of philanthropy within the large vendors and the quote-unquote smaller philanthropists. Those who may only have net worths in the hundreds of millions rather than several billions. And that's actually very important. Their goals, drivers may be very different from what we're used to out of the NIH or the NSF. And they may be very specific to certain diseases. And it's important to work closely with people doing those funding activities to understand what kind of data they need and what kind of data access and support scientists in that. I think we can probably move to the next slide. So the operating environment is, again, another one of these challenges. I think it was Byron who described UMass Medical Center as a medical school where every lab has its own startup. And so there are many, many priorities. Even within a lab, there are many, many different kinds of priorities. DI has several different priorities they're working on at one time. Grad students and postdocs have their own priorities that are generally in line with the people they want to publish and graduate. There's very different sets of drivers. That makes centralized implementations and rollout of things extremely challenging. And I'm here from Aaron's experience in his rollout so far.
Well, thank you, Bruce. So adoption over the last year and a half has been very organic. We knew there would be challenges dealing with many of the things you just mentioned, Bruce. So when we embarked on rolling this out, we did a soft launch, and we allowed labs to sort of find out about us by word of mouth through their peers. And that approach for us has worked great. That allows us time to meet with each laboratory or a department of laboratories and really discuss and understand their science and business models, and then recommend an approach to structuring their notebooks that works best for them, rather than a large, grand scale, out of the box, grand opening where everyone just signs up and starts using. We thought the soft launch with a more one-on-one approach here at the medical school would work better, and it has. In a year and a half, we have over 450 users, which is, for us, is a success story in itself. So, that approach for us was a very important piece of our launch strategy, knowing the complexities across the board for all of the various labs.
And I would echo that as well. At the Broad, we have just about one of everything. I was heavily involved in the rollout of one particular electronic lab notebook. I'm now heavily involved in the rollout of a different electronic lab notebook for different use cases. And it really is the case. The use cases are very different. The chemistry people can be very, very different from the overarching term of biologists. Even within biologists, you really understand those differences between a proteomics person and a cell line. So those are very important to understand. And even different types of cell line people, you may need to handle differently. Are they doing merely characterization merely, or are they doing expansion? And that's a very interesting thing. Terry, I want to talk a bit about the grants, and sorry, Byron, did you want to add anything?
Well, I'm just gonna add one thing before Terry jumps in. You're seeing more and more dry labs spin up with bioinformatics research, and we also wanted to have a system that was sort of discipline agnostic, so it could sort of spread across the various areas of research here at the medical school. So just to add on.
I'd support that as well. We're having computationalists have their own complete sets of challenges in terms of access to data sets. They want access to the wet lab data that's coming off. They need different kinds of informatics solutions, like Jupyter notebooks and things of that sort that are entirely different. Terry, about funding maybe?
Yeah, sorry, I had to bounce in and out, testing to see how the audio was going here. I apologize. I echo Kevin for the challenges here. So for the funding challenges, you really have to take a look at the challenges of how these ELNs are implemented and how their costs can be sort of managed by the Institute. And then likewise, you have to come up with a strategy on either how to make it sustainable through a shared cost model with the Institute or with the individual labs. Now, what has occurred several times at Dana-Farber is that labs would become interested in a lab notebook. They would try it out, but then the cost for the licenses were just too high. So what you end up with is folks going for open source, folks going for software that's readily available that may not be a perfect fit. From the organizational side, it can be a great challenge because if you're looking at a large implementation of a very costly, comprehensive off-the-shelf solution, you're talking about millions of dollars up front, potentially. They're not all that costly, but some of them can be. And then a maintenance fee of some hundreds or maybe even thousands of dollars per license on annual. Now, it's a difficult financial challenge to take on that extra operating cost. So you can see why, if adoption is not going to be 100% in a diverse research organization, why leadership might be a little skeptical or a little cautious trying to step into this realm. And without it having very well-defined edges, like what you might find at a medical institute, or in discipline-specific ELNs, as I think you touched on just previously, it's a very difficult challenge to try and reconcile all of that with the funding.
We lose Bruce again?
Yeah, do we, I know Bruce is trying to reconcile some of the audio issues. We could probably go ahead and move on to the next slide while he's kind of getting that worked out.
Sure.
So for us at the medical school, originally when we went into purchasing and procuring a electronic lab notebook system, costs were obviously a factor. Being a state-funded institution, it's one of the things that we absolutely had to consider. But more importantly, as I mentioned previously, we wanted to find a platform that was very agile and flexible, and what we like to term discipline agnostic. We needed to be able to have all of our vast groups, whether it's biology, chemistry, bioinformatics, or whatever, even non-research. I mean, it's really just a paper note. So we wanted this system to be adaptable by almost anyone. So that was probably our strongest consideration. And next, of course, was funding, right? We looked at a lot of different products that all had slightly different and sometimes similar models for pricing. But what we settled on was a product that was A, very affordable, and B, allowed us a step rate process where the first year was roughly half the cost of the license fee, and then it stepped up in year 2, and then up to the final price for years 3 and beyond. And now the next phase for us is sort of how do we sort of cover those costs in a chargeback model to our customers, our researchers, that is both, acceptable to them and allows us to cover the costs of the license that the IT department pays for. At the moment, at the moment, we haven't rolled anything out because we're only in year 1.5 of 3-year implementation plan. But at the moment, we're considering just a simple per-user flat fee per year. So it's going to be very affordable given the overall cost of the license, and I don't think that we'll have much pushback.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at the cost of implementation driven by the central IT is the second bullet point. You have, as you said, this longitudinal process. You need to have some buy-in, so there needs to be a champion involved. But then you also have to look at IT operations, depending on what the solution is. Is it a cloud solution? Is it an on-prem solution? There's a lot of hidden costs behind the licensing and the implementation itself. It could be the infrastructure. It could be cloud overhead. It could be vendor supported, or it could be on-premises supported. So you may have to increase your support staff to be able to be on hand if things are going wrong. There's also training that's involved. So there's a lot of costs that sort of surround this from a commercial standpoint, and also from even open source software, right? And when you talk about moving forward, having that investment, you could have things that change rapidly as the next big technology boom happens, right? So we have next-gen sequencing. The next thing could potentially be protein sequencing. How is that going to change? What are you going to have to implement new in the data dictionaries? There's a lot of flexibility that needs to be built into the system. And as Byron mentioned, there are certain ones out there that are a keep it simple model where you have to essentially tell the system what you would like it to do. But I can tell you, a lot of the researchers are a little hesitant to spend as much time with the system to say, I need it to do this. A lot of them are interested in saying, I want the system to know already what I want, or I want it to be flexible enough to where the amount of time it takes for me to customize it is trivial. So, and you also talk with pricing models, adoption over time. In a diverse research institute, a medical facility like Byron's, like Bruce's Institute, Dana-Farber's, you're not going to have everybody stand up and say, I want one too, right? There needs to be a champion. There needs to be an adoption rollout period, people to identify where the solution will actually fit. One of the worst things that an organization, in my personal opinion, could do at an academic organization might be to step forward and say, everybody has to use this product. You're going to get a lot of pushback, and you may have some challenges that are insurmountable at that point. So trying to negotiate the flexibility and the costs is going to be a huge, huge deal in trying to select a solution, whether it be a single solution or a multi-vendor solution.
You make a great point, Terry. One of the things that we decided on was going into a cloud solution because we didn't have the funding to provide support staff for, maintaining an instance in a server and the infrastructure side. So we went with cloud, and that was something that was important to us.
Well, and I think that what you're going to see is more people starting to lean towards cloud. I personally like the idea of cloud only because it also puts you one foot closer to the collaboration space, right? So you have less to deal with on-prem firewalls and networking and permissions and roles and all these other kinds of things. You still have those responsibilities to protect your information, but in the cloud, you're one step closer to being able to provide that accessibility to those partner organizations. And clearly, you need to have people involved to make sure that that cloud instance is vetted appropriately for security and compliance purposes.
And you don't have to worry about storage most times. One of the things that no matter what you're doing in the research world, you always run into issues with storage. Not only just the cost of, but the whole infrastructure part of it. So the cloud sort of alleviated that. The vendor we chose uses Amazon Web Services, so there's no issues with storage.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry. One of the issues that we actually spent quite a lot of negotiating with some of our cloud vendors was storage, because what they were potentially concerned about is, since we were conducting, since with the road, a ton of genomic experiments, we suddenly start using the cloud provider as our way of making the genomic data available. Even exons were going to be huge, and so being very careful about such things in contract negotiations is actually very important, to say, what limits are we going to want to look after? We don't have to set hard ones, but we do have to say, at a certain point, let's sit down and talk again. Because if we do start uploading genomic data sets, we've gone from a few gigabytes of data to a few terabytes, hundreds of terabytes fairly quickly. Other thing that we found a challenge with cloud providers, a lot of them have a premium model. Start your, and then we'll roll into, if you need more features or more support, a paid account. The fine details of data privacy in those contracts that you sign when you sign up in those user agreements actually can be very important. Every vendor wants to be able to read your of the system as you use it, but if you go in and like to read the contents of your files, now you've stepped over into a different land, and you have to get legal involved. If they're just looking at to see, are you uploading a PDF versus uploading a PDF or a Word document, it's a very different thing than uploading crisp data screens, which, as you can understand from the Broad's perspective, legal issues, that gets pretty sensitive quickly. I think we could probably go forward a slide. Did we cover anything around the PHI stuff on the previous slide?
That's a good question. Could you go back one more, Kevin, please?
Sorry about that. So, one of the things that I've seen in pharma, and certainly here at the Broad, is this tremendous interest in translational medicine, literally cutting-edge research and getting it in, and then getting it out as a therapy as fast as possible. What that ends up meaning is you have basic researchers who are suddenly ending up with potential for handling PHI, who are unaware of the full extent of what that means. They know that they would need medical record access, so they can talk about the efficacy of treatment and maybe the frequency to see how that improves outcomes. But what they don't realize is now they may have PHI that they have to be very careful about conforming to HIPAA regulations, let alone European data regulations. That's an area where I really step up and not stop people from doing things, but making them aware of the risks and then helping them mitigate those risks in a way that doesn't run anybody afoul of any regulations or ethical concerns. And I'm sure that both Byron and Terry have that concern come up often.
Yeah, absolutely. Working with PHI in our translational space, our clinical informatics space, we have Partners Healthcare who provides a lot of our clinical infrastructure, and we work with them, in terms of with our EHR system and a lot of our traditional clinical informatics systems. But now we're starting to look forward and say, okay, well, how can we create a data space that's a safe data space that we can leverage collaborations with? What kind of systems can we start to spin up and whatnot? So it's kind of interesting. At Dana-Farber, we're actually going from both ends and meeting in the middle, right? We have clinicians that are saying, I'm interested in research. And then we have, our chemists and our biologists saying, I think this is important to pathology. So it's kind of an interesting mix going from both ends and trying to meet somewhere in the middle. And dealing with PHI, especially in the context of data and lab data, you have some other regulations that are involved there too. So I highly recommend that if PHI is anywhere even mentioned, or even the possibility of it being included as a data set, your information security office needs to be involved, your office of privacy needs to be involved, your research administration office needs to be involved. A lot of researchers, when they say, and I say this as a gross generalization, some researchers may say, okay, well, I'm just taking my notebook and I'm making it into an electronic copy. No big deal. Well, from an organizational standpoint, depending on what that data is and depending on what that data may turn into in terms of IP, patents, et cetera, it may actually be a big deal. So I really would encourage folks to establish those very important lines of communications as they develop their needs and they develop what their goals are for an ELN, whether it's to support a specific discipline or to support clinical or non-clinical, whether there are dividing lines or whether they want to merge them together. It's all very important, and the right stakeholders need to be involved.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, one of the things that we constantly remind our labs and researchers of, and it's not that they don't know this, that their lab notes are, in essence, a legal document, right, supporting their research. So when it becomes something of a digital nature, which is much easier to access, share, or, I hate to say it, but get hacked into, they need to remember that it is a very important thing to remember, that we only want to put in our notes what we plan to put out in the public world, especially if it's PHI related or protected. And you're right, our information security team had a lot of interest in the product we selected and was part of the process.
Great, thanks guys. I think we can move forward now. 2 slides. So this is probably the most interesting part of what we've got, and this is a set of tips that we've collectively pooled about what we've learned in our implementations. Again, Byron has done an implementation. I've been part of several, and I know Terry's been part of several as well. Guys, just start hopping in on whichever ones you want, but I certainly have had experience with this. Don't try the enterprise implementation. I think you've heard Terry speak about that as well. That in an academic institution, if you say, please do A, somebody will do B just out of principle. So you really do need to look at that, and the fact that a proteomics lab is going to be vastly different from a CRISPR-focused lab, and they may need very, very different things. And so flexible solutions, therefore, are very, very important. Byron, do you want to hop in?
Right, and I think, yeah, and I think that, the enterprise implementation kind of also relates to the third bullet. That one size does not, no one size fits all. There is no silver bullet, particularly in a very diverse research program. As you mentioned, chemistry is different from CRISPR, is different from proteomics, is different from cell biology, is different from et cetera, et cetera. So you should really not be afraid of attacking this sort of in an out-of-the-box way. So, you talk about find a coalition, the willing, number one. So just because ELNs could present an opportunity doesn't mean that people are ready for it or want one. So the best place to start is one of the things that I mentioned earlier, which is to find a champion or a number of champions that may be domain specific. And then the next bullet is very important, I think. Organize around themes, because you're going to get people with the similar interests, similar data sets, and you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache potentially down the road trying to reconcile differences in data dictionaries, right? So if you can get a solution for chemistry, if you can get a solution for proteomics or molecular biology, embrace the multi-vendor environment. One of the important things that you can do by doing that is to attack this not from a specific needs. So you're drilling in specifically to the lab, their needs, their disciplines, their work, but instead step back and say, well, what are the common organizational needs? Do we need backups? Do we need them to be able to export the data in certain formats? You know, if you can attack it in a way where policy actually facilitates the flexibility and decision making, then what you're going to have is some breathing room and saying, you know what, we don't have to solve everything, but let's see what we can identify that's similar enough that we can solve. And if people want to adopt their own solution, they just need to map to these policies and these requirements. You know, we can vet it, and then they're off. You know, they're off and can do what they need to do.
Yeah, one of the bullets on this page that really speak to me, and we've probably touched on all of them at least a little bit, but the last bullet sort of is something that has always resonated with me, and that is to find partners in the process. I don't think we could have done this implementation as successfully as we did without strong partnerships. And when I say partnerships, we worked very, very closely with our library staff. They're experts on data management and data archival, and they understand the process of publications and DOIs and all of that good stuff. It was a valuable partnership working with the library, and of course, you know, stakeholders in the research community. We recruited members of some of our key labs to be decision makers with us, demoing and piloting products and testing them out and telling us what they did and didn't like. And I think involving as many people as possible in the process without, you know, convoluting and getting too many chefs in the kitchen, but enough to where you get valuable input from different areas was extremely valuable and helpful process for us.
Yeah, and I would definitely echo all of that, because without allies inside, it's very hard. We were very lucky in some of the adoptions of some systems at the Broad, where the genomics platform, which is the platform within the Broad that does the sequencing, tremendous amounts of sequencing, they adopted certain technologies, and we could simply point back to them in some cases. Well, we're adopting what they have done. And a lot of that skepticism that you normally get for new systems sort of fell away, because the success of the genomics platform is what people want to emulate. So finding those allies is extremely important. We've also found, to speak to the sort of third to last bullet, that as much as I might like to have only one system to worry about, the solutions, no vendor has a solution that will meet everybody's needs. Even a third of their needs. So a multi-vendor environment is simply what we're going to end up with. We'll have some people using one for chemistry registration, others for biologics registration, other for CRISPR design work, other for generic lab notebooks. And the key there is how to keep those number of vendors down to a dull roar, how to have some standards around system management, which is most of what the users don't see, in place, so that things aren't quite so different from a support standpoint, and setting clear expectations about really what's possible with the researchers. You have some researchers who say, well, I want to connect this data to this data to this data. And once we start talking to them and saying, well, here's what we need to do with that, and you know, help us find funding for that, the tenor of the conversation often changes, because I understand it's not just magic. It requires effort, requires professional skills, and then we can have a very different kind of conversation with them. And that's where, around system management, the policies are updated and accurate are really important, because you might be charging it on a path, but your institutional policies say, well, you have to do this with all your data, and it just doesn't lend itself to electronic means. So that's, again, where IT can play interference for the researchers and help track that kind of stuff down. I don't think we have anything more on that slide for now. I think we can go to the next. This is probably our favorite slide. So, you know, kind of what to do going forward. I think you've heard this out of Byron and out of Terry and myself, is you really have to understand your operating environment. You have to understand the financing. You have to understand how the groups think, the sociology of them. You have to think about what motivates those groups. How many of them are there? Which ways are they pulling? Before you can begin making some plans on this kind of stuff. And this one is probably the biggest one, is we're really here to propel the understanding and treatment of disease. And reminding people of that helps push people towards their best behaviors, I think. And some things that we think we can move further with, moving to the cloud, as we've talked about. As much as everybody wants to be their own kind of special thing, there really are some standard ways of doing things that we think people should, we can help uncover. And that would allow us to get to things that I know Terry and I are very passionate about, data interchange standards. If we're going to have a multi-vendor environment, then let us make sure we have standards so we can take data from system A and relate it to system B, so we can have things like federated search. We can enable the silos to talk to each other. We can enable the collaboration. I don't care what Sanger's using, because I know I can exchange data with them, and we can work on this kind of stuff. Terry?
No, I completely agree with that last statement. The data interchange standards, they've had it for years in the EHR system with health records using HL7. They have also very disparate needs. The billing report is not the same as a lab report, et cetera, but they have different classifications. I think that we could, take a look at where we might make some gains here. Specifically, you and I had talked about, looking at CRISPR and looking at some other things where standards would lend itself to have a better exchange of data in a standard way. I see that we are getting really close to time. Kevin, do we want to kick it over to the Q&A section at this point?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that, guys. And I know these topics can sometimes really dig deep, but yeah, we do want to get to some of the Q&A here. Mary Beth, did you want to come on and do the Q&A?
Yes, there were a couple of Q&A questions here that came in. One of them, let's see, I think we can direct this one to Bruce to start. What is your experience in working with newer startup software vendors in this space?
Yes. So there's a sort of a sweet zone you can get into if the vendor has to have enough functionality to be truly interesting and enough maturity to understand how to work with a group, but you don't want them so mature that they look at you as a customer as not somebody who can help move them forward. And it's kind of hard to find companies and solutions at that range, but you can actually find